Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Steven Brown, and in today's video, guys, I am going to be tackling the beast. Should the Maple Leafs trade for Taylor Hall? What's it going to cost, asset and dollar-wise? Can they even afford it? This is going to be a longer video probably, but it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be fun. Stick with me to the end. So Pierre LeBrun notes that the initial asking price for Taylor Hall involves a first-round pick. Probably going to be tough to get that in this buyer's market, but it's the right price to start 2 weeks out if you're the Sabres. So that is the asking starting price for Taylor Hall, the absolute high end, the best asset that they're looking for in this trade is a first round pick. But I imagine that as we get closer to the deadline, that the Sabres and fans are going to realize that there's not going to be very many buyers at this year's deadline. Teams just don't have the money to add players this year. Elliot Friedman even noting he doesn't see the Sabres getting a first-round pick for Taylor Hall right now unless several teams decide that they need him. Several teams, very important to stress there. Dude's got 2 goals in 32 games, 17 points on a very, very, very miserable Buffalo Sabres team. They've won 6 games this year and they've been shut out 7 times. The Buffalo Sabres this year are dead last with a points percentage of .250. And they have a goal differential already of a -49. The Sabres in the tank for McDavid 2014-15 season had a points percentage of .329 and a goal differential of -113. If the Buffalo Sabres continued on this pace in an 82-game season, they would be on pace to have a goal differential of -125. Worse than the McDavid tank season. Now, I think that this makes a lot of sense. It's easy to be a standout player on a bad team. It's even harder to be a standout player on a good team. The underlying numbers suggest that Taylor Hall is having a good season on a very, 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 very bad team. Just for context, he's been better offensively and defensively than he was last year in both New Jersey and Arizona. If you're going to look at his raw point totals and just say you don't want him in the comment section, to you, I would say that you don't understand how bad the Buffalo Sabres really are this year. However bad you think that they are, multiply it by 10. If your relative numbers on a bad team are really high, it's because that team is bad. But you're a good player on that bad team. Shot attempts relative to teammates, Taylor Hall, one of the best on the Buffalo Sabres. A little bit lower when it comes to goals for percentage relative to teammates, but what this stat is missing is it's not adjusting for any bad luck or good luck that a player has had. The expected goals for percentage relative to teammates does adjust for that luck factor if a player has been snake bitten or literally every shot that he takes is going in. Scoring chances for percentage relative to teammates, he's third in that as well. So Taylor Hall this season has struggled to score goals. He's struggled to put up points, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is struggling to create scoring opportunities. The Buffalo Sabres have a problem creating scoring chances. They have a problem scoring goals. They are a bad, bad, bad team. Of course, the raw point totals and surface analytics for Taylor Hall aren't going to look good. But if you dig a little bit deeper and you look into the context, you will find a player performing as you would expect him to on a very, very, very bad team. But this trade, the Robin Lehner trade from last year's deadline, was pointed out to me by Dawson on Twitter. Dawson, thank you for pointing this out to me. This right here is how the Maple Leafs would be able to afford Taylor Hall. The Chicago Blackhawks sent Robin Lehner to the Toronto Maple Leafs while retaining 50% salary. And then the Maple Leafs sent Robin Lehner to the Vegas Golden Knights, retaining 44% of his salary. So this establishes that it is totally legal to have a player's salary retained twice in a 3-team trade. So the Buffalo Sabres would need to retain 50%, then we would need another team to retain 50%, and then that team would send the Toronto Maple Leafs Taylor Hall. But that middle team, that third team in this deal, it's important to understand what they're actually giving up. Because in terms of the cap space is kind of irrelevant. It's the real dollars that you're paying for to have that team do that. So in the case of the Maple Leafs being the middleman in the Robin Lehner deal, it cost them $190,000 in real money, and they got a 5th-round pick for their troubles. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it. For now, I want to take a look at the schedule. Obviously, the latest possible date that the Maple Leafs could make a trade for Taylor Hall is the trade deadline, April 12th. But what's the latest date that they can make a trade for this guy that would be convenient for their schedule? Because it's important to remember that the time the teams need to wait before those players can actually play games has been reduced from 14 days to 7 days now. The Maple Leafs have 4 games left against the Winnipeg Jets, and I want the Maple Leafs to be absolutely at 100% full throttle in all 4 of those games. I don't want them to be missing any players because of a trade. I want to kick the crap out of the Jets in all 4 of those games going into the playoffs. So what's the latest possible date that we could trade for Taylor Hall and have him play in all 4 of those games against the Winnipeg Jets? So I'm not sure when the NHL starts the timer on those 7 days, if it is the same day that the trade happened, or if it's the next day after the trade happens. If it's the same day that the trade happens, then I make the trade on the 8th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, he gets into the lineup for this game. If the same day isn't the first day, then I just make it on the 7th. Now, before we take a look at the money situation and the trade a little bit further in depth here, I've seen this projected cap space number anywhere between $190,000 on game day and $280,000 or $90,000 on days where the Toronto Maple Leafs don't play games. So in my mind, there's a range of $100,000 there. If we can come within $100,000 or so of being cap compliant, I'm happy with that. So we're going to be using Cap Friendly's trade machine tool here, and the important thing to note is that I am going to be talking about trading for Taylor Hall on 2 different dates. One on trade deadline day, and the other being that April 7th or April 8th date, because the money situation would be different for both days. So this first example is going to take place on trade deadline day. And my package for Taylor Hall includes Pierre Engvall, a B-level prospect, whoever you prefer, and a 2nd-round pick. If they're very hell-bent on getting a 1st-round pick, then they don't get a B-level prospect. I would change that to maybe a C or a D-level prospect. And in this example, it is showing the Maple Leafs short by $357,000, but what this is not including is that middle team that would retain half of this number. So actually, the calculation would leave the Toronto Maple Leafs with $108,000 in cap space. But if you didn't want to include Pierre Engvall in this deal, or if you think including him hurts the Maple Leafs' package, if you think that the Buffalo Sabres wouldn't want his contract, you can place him on waivers, and if he cleared, it would cost the Maple Leafs $40,000. And I can see the argument there. $40,000 in cap space is not too big of a deal. It gets us outside of that range that we talked about, but again, I'm not too worried about that. There's things that they can do. He can kind of play center. He plays on the penalty kill. $40,000 is worth it. The problem is, in this scenario, you'd have to count, I don't know if it's from the trade deadline day or the next day. If it's the next day, just worst case scenario, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Taylor Hall would miss one of those Winnipeg games, and I want him in the lineup, or any additions that the Maple Leafs make to be in the lineup for all 4 of those games against the Jets. So this is the amount of cap space that the Maple Leafs would be left over with if they were to acquire Taylor Hall and include Pierre Engvall in the deal on April the 7th. And in the April 7th variation of this trade, if you didn't want to include Pierre Engvall, the Maple Leafs would be left with $27,000 in cap space instead of $75,000 in cap space. It's getting closer to being outside of that $100,000 clearance range, but again, there are things that they can do. I'm not too worried about it. They might just have to play one game with a little bit of a wonky lineup, or hope to save up a little bit more cap space between now and whenever they make the deal. And let me just get this straight. This is a very delicate baby. If there is someone who suffers an injury that's more than just a bump or a bruise, and we can't put them on LTIR for the rest of the season, it's going to put a huge dent in all the calculations that I made in this video. So we talked about it earlier, and I said that we were going to come back to it. What would it cost the Toronto Maple Leafs to include a middleman in this deal so that they can get a double salary retention on Taylor Hall? So in the case of this deal, the Maple Leafs retained $1.1 million worth of cap space, or $190,000 in real money. So in my first trade scenario where I have the Maple Leafs acquiring him on trade deadline day, if a team was retaining half on this $931,000 number, it would cost them about $108,000 in real money. And if they were to make the deal on April the 7th, it would cost that middle team about $150,000 in real money, which again is still less than what the Maple Leafs paid for a 5th round pick last season. So really, to include the middleman in the deal, if you want to say that real money in this season is more valuable than last year, what's it worth? A 3rd round pick? How much more than a 5th could you possibly ask for when it's less money? So if it ends up being a 2nd round pick, a B-level prospect, and then you toss like a 3rd to another team, I'm okay with that. If it ends up being a 1st round pick and a lesser prospect, and you toss a 3rd to another team, I guess you'd have to think about it. But again, in a year where the Toronto Maple Leafs have an opportunity to be 8 wins away from the Stanley Cup, to be 4 wins away from the Cup Finals, and all they have to be is the best team in Canada, you go for it. I think that this lineup looks pretty friggin' great. If you're curious if the Maple Leafs could make upgrades beyond just Taylor Hall, the answer is yes, but that would more than likely involve trading Alex Kerfoot. And conveniently enough, I did a video talking about a trade that would include Alex Kerfoot in it the other day that would get the Maple Leafs a forward similar to him, get an upgrade on their blue line, and save them cap space. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Link above the screen. And I think a lot of people misunderstand when I make videos like this. I'm not saying that I want this to happen, but I'm also not saying that I don't want it to happen, if that makes sense. I'm just making the video. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, remember, whatever happens, I just hope that something happens.